Good evening to everybody and welcome to God's Answers Your Questions, the uh, Friday evening edition. If you are coming in on Facebook, submit your questions or comments to us there. We'll, we'll see if we have time after the show, after what we're doing today, but I think we have a pretty full show today. But if you are on YouTube, submit your questions there. We're really glad you're able to join us. Joining me today is Randy Sturgis. How are you doing, Randy?
Doing great.
Great, good to have you on today. Jim Rice, how are you doing, Jim?
I am doing fantastic, thank you.
Good. Glad you all are doing great tonight. And we have a special guest who will introduce what we're talking about later on after we pray. But Ed Smith, how are you doing tonight, brother?
I'm blessed. So good to be with you.
Well, good. So good to be with y'all tonight. What better thing can we do on a Friday night than study God's Word uh, and talk about the work going on in different countries? A little bit of a teaser there. But let's pray and then turn it over to Uncle Eddie. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your love. Thank you for this program. Please help it to be a blessing to others. Please bless Ed to remember the things he's prepared to help us as we strive to be your servants to always do your will. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Well, whenever you're ready, Ed, why don't you start us off what we're talking about tonight?
Okay. You want to go ahead and start the slides? And so this is my fourth trip to Tanzania, specifically the city of Dar Salaam, and my fourth trip in about 2.5 years. I was there, first of all, in 2019, and then I went over again in March of 2020, and I happened to get there and was sort of stuck there during the COVID thing, and that broke out. So I ended up getting home, and in exchange for some of my frustration, the airlines gave me another ticket. And so I was able to use that ticket again, but I had to use it by the end of the year. So I made 2 trips last year, and then I followed up again this year in August. So that was my fourth time to Dar Salaam. When we go to the next slide, I'll just show everybody a map here of what we're talking about. So this is the east coast of Africa. Madagascar is off to the blue area. Tanzania is bordered by Uganda and Kenya to the north, Congo to the west, and Mozambique and Zambia to the south, and Malawi is there as well. Dar es Salaam's the fastest growing city in Africa. Some people say it's the second fastest. There's a huge young population. Anytime you have a fast growing city, you usually have young people coming and young families growing. And I've been working with several of the churches of Christ in the city, and most of them are looking to be independent. We believe the Bible teaches that congregations are to be both independent and autonomous, and so they're looking for that opportunity. And unfortunately, in some cases, they have not been well prepared for that. So a lot of my effort's been trying to teach about elders, about local autonomy, and what the church is supposed to be doing and focusing on. If you want to go to the next slide, it's a historic picture of Dar es Salaam. It started out as a sleepy town. The actual city center has about 5 million people. But when we talk about Dar es Salaam, we're talking about a large geographic area. So like New York City, you've got Manhattan, but you've also got all the suburbs. And so 5 million people. It was originally a German colony, and then it was taken over by the British in between the two world wars, and then eventually the British gave them their own independence in the 1960s. And if you go to the next picture, it's another historic picture that shows what it used to look like back in the 1950s and 60s, just a well laid out, sleepy kind of fishing village. But go to the next slide, CJ, and you see how things have changed so much in just about 40 years. So we've gone from having very few people to tens of millions of people. And go on to the next slide, we see that even National Geographic has mentioned the pace at which the city is growing is just phenomenal. The Tanzanian government and the Chinese and the Indian governments are all working to make this the largest port in East Africa. So it's part of that Indian Ocean Rim trade, and they hope to be able to bring everything out of Central Africa to this port, and all the imports from India and China will be coming into this port area. So they're building huge deep water docks that go a mile and a half out into the ocean to help unload some super tankers. So with that kind of growth, you get a lot of problems like this slide shows you. You have traffic jams any time of the day or night. You don't know when they're going to happen. And so it makes it a little bit difficult to plan classes, where to be, being on time. Sometimes we joke about African time, where people are always sort of late. But if you understand their lifestyle, you also have a little understanding that it's going to be difficult for people to predict sometimes. You can allow an hour to go for a 20-minute ride, and it still may be an hour late. And if you go on to the next slide, this is a fairly recent projection graph of the population of Dar Salaam. I think this one was made in about the year 2000, 2002. And so they thought that it would, be taking off, but it would take us half a century to reach 21 million people. But if you go to the next slide, what happens is it goes from what they predicted, and go ahead and put the advance on the next slide, CJ. It just went up very steeply, and so now they have an estimated 7 million people, and they predict by the end of this century, another 80 years, if you go to the next slide, that we're going to have 76 million people. So just imagine yourself in a congregation of maybe 50 people. And in 80 years, that congregation is going to have 500 people. The traffic that you sit in today is going to have 10 more cars potentially around you in 80 years. And it just really boggles the mind at how many people there are, which means they need the gospel. That's where the future is. And the future is now. The present demand is for us to be there. So when I look at congregations in my own country, I see some limited opportunities. I mean, obviously there are always souls to be saved, but the limited opportunities tell me that I need to look at where I might be more effective in helping them in their work. And so Dar Salaam has been the place that I've decided to focus over the last couple of years. I've been to several other African countries, but this city has a huge potential, and there's a wide open door there. So if you go to the next slide, we'll start talking a little bit about the lifestyle and what it means. So you've got basically a third world environment. There are paved roads, but there are a lot of dirt roads as well. Sanitation is very poor. A lot of disease, dengue fever, malaria. Those are all very common occurrences. Typhoid. I was in a car a couple trips back, and a young lady began throwing up behind me, and they took her to the doctor. She had typhoid. So you have to anticipate that. I usually make sure that I've kept current with my shots, my vaccines, my paperwork, and I take out some extra insurance when I go over to these places because my body's not fit to handle some of these diseases and things easily. So I take precautions in going over there. If you go on to the next slide, CJ. You got the next one up? Okay, so they're preparing for this population boom. And they've got these high-rise buildings that aren't even inhabited yet. The government owns all property in this country. They lease it out to you as they will for however long they want to, and that's usually done through the local community government or tribal elders if you're off in the villages and things. And so they're trying the best they can to be ready for this onslaught of people. But go ahead and go back to that traffic slide there. Just looking out over all the traffic, you can see off in the distance there, they're building a bridge over this congested area. And so, of course, that makes it even more congested while they have the construction going on. But they are trying to do their best to accommodate this. And they're building a high-speed bus line. If you go to the next slide, bus rapid transit, the BRT. And so they have these dedicated waiting platforms, and they have these dedicated bus lanes. And so everything would be pushed off to the side, and they will convey as many people as they can on these buses that are sort of linked together that probably hold 70 or 80 people, and move them along as quickly as they can from the city center out to the suburbs. Whenever you have this kind of traffic, there's an advantage if you can be near one of the terminal places. You have the most people to speak to about the gospel. If you go to the next slide, one of the churches that I've worked with is the Church of Bagala, and it is at the end of one of these high-speed lines. And so there's a huge opportunity. This congregation already has about 200, 220 people, but given their location, they could easily grow and double that, and there could be another church easily across the street by the time the century's over. So how do these people live? One of the things that we as Americans have to understand is that the gospel reaches all people in every culture. And so we have to allow the gospel to do its work and not try to Americanize people in other countries to make them Christians. They can be Christians in their own culture, but we have to understand what that means. Now, in Dar Salaam and Tanzania in general, there's a fairly recent tradition of slavery. If you go to the next slide, CJ, it shows some historic photographs of the slave conditions. The island of Zanzibar, which is part of the country now, was known for slave trade. The Arabs would come down from Arabia and gather slaves from the interior of Africa and take them out. They'd keep it in a holding cell like the one up there in the center of the picture, where basically they had to stand in line, chained in a trench, and they couldn't easily fight or get out of that trench and create any kind of rebellion. You look at the man on the right. This is a picture taken from the early 20th century. We're not going back too far. Go back one more slide here, CJ, or go to the next slide, please. Other way. And these are Africans trading in Africans for the most part. And I spoke to a man who remembers talking to his grandfather, who was a tribal elder, but he's also a slave trader. And so he remembers now, just a generation or two removed, that this is part of their culture. So there's not a whole lot of value on human life, not a lot of dignity associated with people. And I think the gospel has a good opportunity to teach people how God views us, being created in his own image. Okay, you can go to the next one. Outside of these congested roads, you have what I call a semi-rural lifestyle. Basically, people living here are in the midst of 20, 30, 40,000 other people, but it's not that much of a different picture going out into the villages. You still have dirt roads. Most people walk. If they can, they have a motorcycle or the tiki kind of thing there on the right, a tri motorcycle. We've been able to get up to 6 people in one of those little things, and we putz along at about 30 miles an hour, but it's better than paying a fortune for a private ride or having to walk a great distance. If you go to the next slide, this is what it looks like along some of the roads. All dirt roads away from the paved area. Go to the next slide. They still have outdoor markets. Most people go there to buy their food. And you go to the next slide, and you see just construction going on all over the place. Every square inch, if it's not been built on, they're trying to build now. So they put up a block wall, they tie it together beams, and then they plaster over it. You can go on to that slide, CJ. This is a little cafe. Very typical kind of place people will go together. We're going to come back to the slide later on, but if you notice the man in the background that's sort of leaning over by that red bag, he's the owner, and he's done very well for himself. But if you go to the next picture on this slide, the idea of hygiene is sort of foreign to them. This is, the cloth that they wipe the tables with, and all those black spots are flies. And so you have to be careful, and you usually keep your drink covered while you're sitting there, making sure that the flies don't leave anything behind for you.
Wow.
And then there are the street vendors, the guys that sell stuff on the street. This is locusts. You remember John the Baptist ate locusts and wild honey. And so I thought, well, I ought to try some locusts just to say that I've tried it. So I bought some, and it was not a happy consequence. For about 3 or 4 days, I finally had to go to the doctor and get some medicine to help me out. But there are a lot of things to be careful of, and we have to appreciate that these are poor people. I haven't seen it in Tanzania, but I have seen it in other African countries. I've seen children out gathering termites so they can have something to eat. And that's their protein for the day. So go on to the next one, CJ. We hear a lot of talk in our politics right now about infrastructure. And it's important to have good roads and bridges. But when you look at what happens in a country that's on the equator, where they have seasonal rains 2 times a year that can wash out an entire road in one storm, you have to ask yourself, how do you help these people? Go ahead and put up the next couple of advances. How do you help a country that's out of poverty when one season of rain can wash out everything that's been done in the last year? And what do you do with the situation? Do you repair it? That's going to take money. Do you buy fancy equipment so you come in after every storm and try to get it open again? That takes a lot of money. You got limited funds for food and for medicine. How do you spend your money? You don't have a lot of it. And so the government does, I think, a fairly good job at what they can with the resources they have. That doesn't excuse a lot of the corruption and things that you see, but it does help you understand the plight of the people a little bit. You may have any questions or observations? Landfill.
It's not like here, is it? It's totally different than what it is here.
It is. And, I try to show people what it's like in other parts of the world. We really don't have a grasp. CJ, if you go to the next one, even in a big city like Dar Salaam, you still have to often go to the well to get your water for the day. You don't always have plumbing in your own home. And so the city comes along, there's a black cistern there. They fill it up from time to time, and the ladies go down and they meet at the well, and they get their water for their household use. If you go on to the next slide, you got 7 million people. That's a lot of trash, and they don't have sophisticated equipment to build a landfill. They can't put it on boats and take it off and dump it in the ocean. So it goes to wherever is convenient. And so here you have a couple of boys that are actually making little pull-behind cars and having races through the landfill. And if you go to the next slide, CJ, we see that there are people that go down into these landfills and scavenge for whatever they can find of value. It might be bottles, it might be batteries, it might be something that they think that they can turn into something to make a profit and live with. So just the scale of the landfill right in the middle of the road, Gives you an idea of what they have to live with. Next one. You often have to work with tribal elders. Especially as you get out into the rural areas, you have to know who these people are. They have to know who you are and whether or not they want you in their village. They know everybody that comes and goes. This man is the chief in a village that has 2 cars, his and the local Muslim guys. And so if there's another car going through and staying and spending time, he needs to know about that, and he will find out what's going on. These are his people. He takes care of them. He makes sure he knows what's best for them and does everything he can for them. Go on to the next slide. This is one of the older towns. This is a slave trading town. It was built about 1820. So as we were getting out of the slave trade in the early 19th century, other countries are still very much involved in it. But this is not a atypical view. You've got old houses, metal tin roofs, and a satellite dish on almost every other house. They still want to have their communication and their internet and their entertainment.
Well, there's still slave trade today?
Boy, that's sort of a touchy question. There is slave trade going on. Some of it has to do with ISIS, and we'll talk about them later on. There is human trafficking, and it's one of these things where Tanzania, I think, has actually got a pretty good handle on it right now. But even in our own country, we still have a lot of trafficking going on, and it's not something a lot of people know about, and unless you're exposed to it or part of it. But I know law enforcement and social workers have a lot on their hands, even in our own country.
Yeah, I hear things going on here in Flint.
Yeah, anytime you have poverty, you have people that prey on that and take advantage of other people.
That's too bad.
Okay, CJ, next one. So, you do what you can to get by. Motorcycles, this poor fellow, you could just see his bike lean over when he came to a stop. He was trying to get down onto the dirt path to get around the traffic, and the whole thing just laid over on him. And fortunately, the guy in the car next to him got out. The passenger got out and helped him lift it back up, and he's on his way. But people help each other, and you need a good network of people to survive in this kind of environment, which is good in terms of the church, in a sense that you're likely to be cut off by your family. So you need a new family. You need people that care about you and will help you. Next one.
Well,
So what you're saying is,
right.
what you're saying is some people, when they become a Christian, their family kicks them out?
Yes. And we'll talk about that a little bit. The population is about 40% Muslim. And man I work with, Zubairi, has taken into his home several teenagers who obeyed the gospel and were attacked by their own families.
Whoa.
What's that on the back of the motorcycle, Ed? Do you know?
What's on there?
Yeah, do you know?
A little bit of everything. I think that's probably rice and grain.
Oh, okay.
Looks like he's got a couple extra greens and things to take along with it. The attitude towards women, in many ways, they're viewed as slaves. They're second-class citizens, maybe third-class citizens. It's not unusual to see television programs that portray physical abuse. Sometimes it's sort of portrayed as comedy, where the guy gets his back, but it's not unheard of for women to be taken advantage of and abused. And if you go to the next slide. Back to this Muslim, polygamy is still practiced in Tanzania. This man has 3 wives. The youngest one helps run this particular cafe. She's 19 years old. She's been married to this man who's probably my age, into his late 50s or early 60s. She's been married to him for 3 years. She got married when she was 16, which means the arrangement was probably made when she was 13 or 14. And for us, it's very difficult to understand how a young woman might, settle for being the third wife of somebody. But if the alternative is that you're going to be marrying an unknown character who may beat you, and you have this opportunity to be taken care of by a man that's got a lot of respect and a lot of money, that has a lot of appeal to somebody that doesn't really see any future in their own abilities and their own opportunities. And so marriage becomes a way that some women secure, hopefully, a good relationship. But it's not unusual, particularly among the Muslims, to have 3 or 4 wives. I think the most right now is one of the chiefs up in the northern area near Mount Kilimanjaro. I think he has 33 wives, and he's got the money to support 33 wives. And the Muslim attitude is, we're going to outstrip Christianity simply by having more wives and kids. And so they're breeding the next generation of Muslims. Next one.
And I thought Solomon.
I'm sorry?
I said, and I thought Solomon was bad.
Yeah.
Well,
it's an issue, and it's an issue among Christians because a lot of them come in with a lot of baggage about how to treat their wives. And so I've done a lot of classes on marriage and God's plan for marriage and women. And this is in the purest sense, this is good news for women when they come to the gospel and their husbands obey the gospel. Next one. Okay, so about 40% of the country identifies itself as Muslim, somewhere between 35 and 40%. In Dar Salaam and the rest of the country, CJ, you can just go ahead and let that go. And the rest of the southern area, that percentage obviously is much higher. So it's probably closer to 50 or 60% along those borders, and maybe 25 or 30% closer to Uganda and other countries. And so you have a lot of young men that don't have anything to do. They're hanging out here at the pool hall, and some things don't change from one culture to another. There's a lot of drinking going on. They make their own alcohol. There's a bicycle one of the guys is blessed with, and if you look behind the pool table, you can see the top of a motorcycle. And what ISIS will do, they'll come into a village like this, and they will pick out 1 or 2 young men and buy them a motorcycle. It costs ISIS, $1,000. That's nothing to them. And then they begin to use that young man to give them information and to carry out deeds for them, and hopefully recruit them. That it starts out just offering luxuries to poor people, and they'll often go along with that. Next slide. There's still a fair amount of paganism, probably between 5 and 8% of the population still practices their native practices, and even those that profess to be Muslim or Christian will often also engage in what we call pagan or occult things. And so here's a picture of a young albino man. If you turn to the next slide, there's a headline that came out of Newsweek probably 5 years ago, and across the bottom of that it says, these albinos fear for their lives because they are murdered and attacked for body parts, because part of the pagan tradition is that they have supernatural powers because of the color of their skin, and they will harvest some of that to make their potions and their medicines. This isn't unique to Tanzania, and it got to be so bad about 4 years ago that the government's really clamped down on it and tried to put an end to it. But I went into an area one time where there's an albino boy, and he came out to look at the white men because he'd never seen any other white people before. Next one. Now, about 60% of the population nationally considers themselves nominally Christian. Again, when the Germans came and colonized this part of the world, they brought in Roman Catholicism. So there are a lot of people that are nominally Catholic. They may go to Mass, they may not, but they're not Muslim, so most of them get lumped into being Christian. But most churches over there have to be approved by the government. And so we're talking about denominational situations where they say, yes, you can come in and have your denomination here, or they say, no, you can't. We don't want certain groups of people. So that's something that the New Testament Christians have to sort of try and work with and work around. You go to the next slide. There are a lot of Pentecostals. Again, that native idea of spirits and the occult has a lot of appeal in terms of Pentecostalism. And so there are teachers that go out. This particular man was arrested because he was encouraging people to come to the front to give them some kind of special healing, and 20 people were trampled to death. And that's why the government wants to keep an eye on things and know what these groups are teaching and what they're doing. They feel like there's a interest that the state has in what's being taught. And again, when you have people that are abusing their power and the Bible and doing things in the name of Christianity that are not true, then that brings repercussions on those that are trying to do the New Testament thing. Next page. Okay, so this most recent trip, and this is, we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit, CJ, okay? I took a young man named Chad Brewer. Chad preaches in the Richmond, Virginia area. He also preaches in Williamsburg, although he's trying to focus more now on his work in Richmond. And I've known Chad for many years. He's at some of the camps that I did several years ago in Ohio, and has been out preaching for many years. He's made several other trips to Africa, but this is his first trip to Tanzania. We worked with the man in the middle, Zubairi, and he's the man I've worked with on all 4 trips. He's the one that opens the doors for me, and my role is to go over and hold his hands up, just like somebody held Moses' hands up. I go to supplement his work. He's the one that is there day in and day out doing all the hard work. But I give him opportunities. He uses me to go to speak to people and hopefully open fresh doors. Next slide. And you just go right on down the list here. There's some things, some bullet points here along the side. Zubairi was raised with just a nominal religion, and after he got out of school, he played professional soccer for a while. That opens a lot of doors. He's a big guy. He's a goalkeeper, and people know the team that he played on. And so that opens doors for him. He didn't have any real skills, so he would grow vegetables and try to sell them in the markets, but the Chinese have sort of taken over that. And so as a young man, he began to look to religion, and he began to explore Islam because a lot of his friends were Muslim. Godwin Diego taught him the gospel and then encouraged him to become a preacher, and he's trained and worked with Godwin. He's got his own natural children, and he's adopted several others into his family, some older, some younger. And there are some that he has not officially adopted, but they're kicked out of their home. The parents won't give up their parental rights, but they'll be living with Zubairi or with one of the other Christians that he tries to help them out with. So there's a lot of opportunity to care for widows and orphans in that sense. And he now serves as one of the elders of the Bagala Church, as well as doing his evangelistic work. Next one. Go ahead for the next 2. Okay, the next one. when I go there, I try to work with the other preachers and make myself as useful as possible to them. So they tell me what topics they need to have teaching on, what concerns they have in their congregations, or we do outreach together. Dennis is a very energetic preacher, and I enjoyed working with him. He has very good English. Nicholas is also working with them together, but his English is a little more limited. And then the man in the middle, Godwin Diego, is the man that really has done a lion's share of the effort for the kingdom there. He was converted in, I think it was 1980 something, and from Islam. And he has written many books, many tracts, and has actually been asked by the government to quit evangelizing because it creates problems among the Muslims when he tries to convert people to Christianity. So he's getting up in age. He's got some health issues now, but he's still very well respected and very capable. Next slide. And these are just some of the other preachers that I had the privilege to go out and work with. And so when we go over there, they find out that we're going to have classes. They arrange their schedules to come and attend the classes. They ask great questions, questions that you and I probably don't think of very often. If a man has 2 wives and he realizes that's not scriptural, what does he do? Does he still have to support his second wife even though he knows that he can no longer have a relationship with her? Those are questions that we don't usually get asked in our country. Next slide. And so this is just a list of titles. It's a little hard for me to read here on this screen, but just a list of titles and things of some of the issues and topics that they've asked about: the power of changed lives of preacher in the church, what's their relationship, wives of elders and deacons, and having a heart to help the widows. Again, they have a lot of single widows there, being independent. And if you go on to the next slide, CJ. So here's Brother Chad giving his lessons. Next slide. You can just go right through these pretty quickly, CJ, though. Working with elders. This one is an animation. I do a thing where I teach the 17 steps of the Bible, and I've translated that with help into Swahili. We do it in Swahili. We do it also in Shona, in other countries. Go on to the next one, CJ. I think I've done it in French. And then we do a lot of home studies. And again, Brother Godwin would just say, hey, I've got my neighbors, come on over, and we'll have 8, 10, 12 people on an hour's notice that want to have a Bible study. And so we did end up baptizing one young man after one of these studies. He's actually, I'm trying to point to a picture that you guys can't see, but if you look at the lower left corner, you can see the eyeglass frames of the young man that was baptized the next day. Next slide. Sometimes our home studies are not so much in the home, they're outside. And this one we started with about 7 people. It was a Friday night after work, after supper. And by the time we were done, we probably had close to 30 people there. Most in this group are Muslims and a couple members of the church. The 2 men on the right side of this picture sitting together, the older man and his son. The son is a local congressman, and his father is very well respected, but they wanted to know what I was teaching, so they came down to hear in person what we were up to. Next slide. So we go out to the streets, and this is the local people. They know where to go. They know where they can have conversations about the Bible, and I just give an excuse, for them to go speak to somebody again. They've done this before. We went out for about 3.5 hours, and at the end of that 3.5 hours, we had 11 people that had either committed to a Bible study or had committed to come to worship at the local congregation and check out what they were teaching, what they were doing. Next slide. Let's just there's going to be some more pictures here of that kind of work. So, I let the local men do their work. I'm there to back up and to point things out and to make comments and to answer questions. But they have to do the translating in most cases anyway. Hotel staff. Go ahead to that slide, CJ, because I'm staying in one place for 2, sometimes 3 weeks at a time. I get to know these people. They know me. Most hotel guests are there for a night, maybe 2. And so they ask me for Bibles. They ask me Bible questions at midnight when things have settled down and they have a chance to read their Bibles and there's not a lot going on. And so we gave out 6 Bibles this time to the hotel staff. And I have 2 invitations to go to their denominational churches to teach the next time I'm in Tanzania. Next one. We had the opportunity to go to a school. This is the second largest school in Tanzania. Zuberi lives close to the school, and they have given him a standing invitation to come whenever he can. There are 4,505 students in this school, all ages. Next slide. Very well behaved. Again, a high percentage of Muslim students. You can see the women in the back with their covering on. Very polite, very attentive. If you go to the next slide. We happen to be in a special needs class. Most of these students are visually impaired or challenged or even blind. And there are several adult workers with them, helping them. And we had a lot of good questions. We were there for about an hour. And hopefully Zuberi will be able to go back again and talk about things. So these are people that have never seen an American. They have no idea what my country is like. Baptisms, most of the churches are ready. We had 2 2 in the city of Dar Salaam while I was there that I was able to see. Go ahead and advance the next one, CJ. And then we heard about some others that we weren't able to get to. And then there were some of the other villages that we went out to that time. Next slide. Talking about Churches of Christ. Next slide. What is the Church of Christ? Well, if you go to the internet, you can find a definition from Christianity.com. Churches of Christ send things to know about their history, beliefs, and they say right out there is represented as worldwide as one of the various denominations. And many members of the Churches of Christ view themselves as another denomination. They just happen to view themselves as the right denomination, whereas other denominations are wrong. But they have this thinking, this mentality that they're just, the right flavor out of 32 varieties, which really is not what New Testament Christianity is all about. If you go to the next slide, CJ, we talk about what is the Church of Christ. On the left side, we're either speaking about the universal bride of Christ, that body of all believers that transcends time and place. I belong to the same church that Peter and Paul and all the other early disciples belonged to. Or we're talking about a local group of those believers that get together and are independent and autonomous. And if you go to the next slide, really, whenever we start trying to get these local groups to act collectively, we have in fact formed a denomination. And in order to do that, we have to surrender the local limited oversight of the elders to some other church or some other entity. And that's not what we see in the New Testament. And so this is a major principle that I try and teach while I'm over there. Next one. Now I'm just going to show some of the slides of the congregations I've worked with. Mbiki was a new one for me to go to, a huge congregation. They have doubled the size of their building. They were working on it while we were there, probably numbering or going from about 120 people to now close to 180. They do indeed support one of their own preachers. Next slide. Tamiki is one of the older congregations. It's been heavily influenced by schools of Bible teaching and other American agencies. They've done a lot, but they are trying to find out how to be an independent congregation and do the work that they've been doing with their own resources. That's going to be a challenge for them. Next picture. Kingugi. I didn't make it this time to Kingugi, but it's just fun to say that name. I just had to put it up there. You get to say Kingugi. But this is a good congregation. And again, if you go to the next slide, we went out, we did street evangelism in this part of the city. And the next slide, they decided to have a revival meeting. They didn't tell me they were having a revival meeting, but they built a platform for me, and I helped out because I had to stand on the thing. And we actually ended up with 2 Bible studies from that meeting effort. We didn't have a lot of input, but we did have some. And then the next one, which is going to be Kizuani, is Diego's congregation now that he's working with. He's been there for several years, and they have been very hospitable, very diligent in searching out the scriptures and looking at these things. Go ahead to the next slide. A lot of preacher and elders coming for classes here. And if you go to the next slide, also some classes just for the ladies, which is something that they don't get very often. And so after talking to the ladies, they said, well, we wish our husbands had been here for this class too. And so we work on that. If you go to the next couple slides, CJ, you can go through these pretty quickly, but just some of the outlines. I found out that Google Translate does a very good job at translating into Swahili. And so I'll do my outlines in English. I'll give that to the translator, but I also give him a Swahili copy that they can make copies of for themselves. He can read through that, but then I ask him to use the English outline while he's translating for me, so we stay on the same point together. But at least he has an idea of where we're going and the points that I'm making and which scriptures we're going to be going to. So go ahead and go over the next couple slides here. So the Bagala Church, again, has about 220 members. Again, they've expanded their building. They're in a great location. Next picture just shows the diligence that they have to coming in and studying to see if what we're saying is true and comparing what we're teaching with the scriptures. If you go to the next slide, they specifically asked me to participate in a marriage series for them. They did a 2-day series, and they asked me to kick it off with a couple lessons on marriage and the family. So go on to the next part, and you guys have been real patient. You have any questions on that? Anything that we've gone over there?
I'm in awe.
Okay. Well, it's just amazing to find people that want to hear the gospel. And that's so refreshing from what we often encounter. So when we go over there, we go over to work, and this is one of the things that we still have to try and balance because they have jobs, they have school, they have things that they're doing, they have traffic issues. You don't want to go out at the wrong time of day or you'll be stuck in traffic and you'll just waste your time. But there's a lot to do. And I'd like to be able to get 4 or 5 other men to go with me, maybe rent the hotel conference room and just have people come that want to have Bible study and just work from the hotel and offer 8, 10, 12 hours of classes a day. So go ahead.
You made a point a while ago that you didn't try to Americanize them. You try to teach them the gospel. And I think they need to understand the gospel and apply it in their culture the way it was meant to be.
Right. And one of the things about being an American is that they often think that what I'm offering is their key to money. That because I come from a wealthy country, I'm going to be able to help them, and I'm going to help them in financial ways. I'm going to sponsor them to come to America. I'm going to buy them the newest iPhone or whatever as a gift, just all kinds of expectations. And the gospel needs to fit where they are in their circumstance.
And think about what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11 concerning the head coverings. That was one of the traditions that wasn't taught in all the churches.
I didn't quite follow all that, CJ.
I thought about 1 Corinthians 11 when Paul talks about the head coverings, and then he says, but it's not this way in all the churches, so we do see some tradition even way back when the church was just getting started.
Yeah, and there's a real tendency in this culture for them to either copy the denominations, and so uh, that that revival meeting, they hired a disc jockey and they were booming out rock music and they had these big speakers going and we had some words about that and tried to work it out because you try to appeal to people on that level and they come to your gospel meeting and then you hand them a book and say, hey, we're going to sing without any instruments. That just doesn't go over too well. So and some of these communities, the women do not sit with the men. The men have a position of honor and distinction. The women sit on the other side or in the back. The children are usually with the women. Uh, Again, if someone has been converted from Islam and she's always worn a covering, my job is not to go in there and say, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. Because in her culture, I think she does. And so she'll continue to respect that. And I'll try to respect that as well and not, again, make them into an American church or Americanize them. They're Christians. They're intelligent. They can follow the gospel. It's simple. They can do it themselves. And that's a lot of my message. They don't need to have somebody else coming over them. They need to be honest with the scriptures. Now, there's a lot of illiteracy, and they have a long ways to go in their knowledge of the scriptures, but they can do it themselves. And that's the goal to get them there.
I think the thing that's so great is their interest in the gospel. We could sit here in the United States and talk about the gospel. We can go door to door. We can preach. We can send out tracts electronically. And all you hear is crickets sometimes. And I think it's because of our culture. We have so much finances and so many good things. We can sit back and say, I take my life good and easy. You have plenty of years to live. Over there, I think because they don't have as much as we've got, that maybe they see the value of it. And at least that's my thought, that you go to these places and you can get even Muslims to come in and sit down and listen to the gospel. I think it's fantastic.
It is. And I'll finish up here as quickly as I can. We went down to the southern region, the Matara region. Next slide. And this is down the border of Mozambique. If you look at the little red dot, that's a port city that was run by ISIS. ISIS had taken over the islands along the coast of Mozambique. And if you remember back about April, they actually invaded a large city. And the two yellow dots are the nearest one is about 70 miles away, and the upper one is about 100 miles away as the crow flies. We're not that far away from where ISIS is very active. And these people have never heard the simple gospel. They may have heard something in Mass, they may have heard something in their Pentecostal church, but they've never heard the gospel plan of salvation. Go to the next slide for me, CJ. So we got on about 4 in the morning, catch the 6 o'clock bus, or it left at 6. We had to be there at 5:30, and we rode for 8 hours on the bus. We had one pit stop, and I had a hard time getting my legs uncramped when we got off the bus. But the drive-through window is they come to you and they hold stuff up for you to buy through the window, and the bus just keeps on going. Next one. Sometimes they'll even come on the bus, and this is the fish lady. And if you go to the next one, she brings on her dried salted fish, and that wasn't too appetizing to me, but that's what you can afford to buy when you only have 20 cents to buy something to eat. And the smell stays with you longer, I think, than the fish does.
Oh my.
So ISIS has been active in northern Mozambique for several years now, for 5 or 6 years. And if you look at the bottom of that, it says they've killed more than 2,000 people in that part of Mozambique since 2017. And this past spring, they had actually taken a bunch of people and executed 50 young men on a soccer field and beheaded them. Go to the next one, CJ. Zubair actually found evidence of these guys coming into Tanzania and found out where they're staying and said, I don't know what to do with this information. He doesn't know who to trust in his own government. Go to the next one. So I happen to go ahead and do that next one. That I happen to have a brother in Christ that I know works for a certain agency that we're not supposed to talk about. So I contacted him and said, what do we do with this information? And so he put us in touch, and one of the men was arrested and deported back to Somalia, and they tried to shut down that. We actually passed a convoy of some army soldiers going down to the border area while we were coming home. Next one. So there's a major push just a couple of days really before I got up there. I went down the end of August. They'd been making this push at the beginning of August to try and push out ISIS. And so many of those people were fleeing into the border area of Tanzania. The Tanzania army was stepping up to try and secure their own border and arrest these ISIS people. Next slide. Just go ahead and push the button, CJ, and show the era where these guys are coming over the mountains into Tanzania. Next one. So when you go to a place like this, you have to know your audience. You have to know who you're speaking to and what their interests are. As I mentioned, this is a local congressional representative. He wants to know what I'm teaching. I'm not teaching politics. I'm not teaching health and wealth gospels. I'm teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that keeps my focus on things that are essentially uncontroversial as far as government's concerned. I'm not going to teach rebellion. I'm going to teach them to be submissive to the government. Next one. And again, so this is the local chief. He's Muslim. He's got the traditional Muslim cap on. He has no problem with me teaching about Jesus. The Quran talks about Yesu, or Isu. And so there are a lot of Muslims that know the name, but they don't really know anything about Jesus. And so that gives me an opportunity to go in and teach. And like I said, he knows where I am. He actually arranged for me to have a place to stay. He gave us his car for the couple days we were there, and made sure that we were well protected and taken care of. Next one. So I'm sorry, I put animations on these, and in PowerPoint, these go really fast, but we had to go up to Google. So we stayed at a Catholic hostel, youth or Abbey, and then we had classes all day long on Friday. And at the end of these classes, where we probably had 30 to 40 people, we had two that wanted to be baptized. Both of them went home to talk to their families because they wanted to teach their families and bring their families along. One of them was baptized the next day. I didn't hear about the other one. But when we left this area, the preachers had 11 contacts for Bible studies. Go on to the next one. Yeah, a day's worth of work. These people came, they heard the gospel. Some wanted to obey it right away. Some wanted to think about it, but the preachers are there to study with them. Again, youth. We live in an aging society, and it's so unusual for us to look around and see just scads of kids all over. The average median age, I think, right now is about 40 years old in Tanzania. And I get a lot of respect because I have gray hair. It's just they don't have that many old people. Next one. So these are the two preachers of those two little yellow dots that came to my classes. And the man in the gray shirt, his son's actually sick right now. So as you offer your prayers tonight, remember his son. And the other one is the one that lives very close to the border. He's working very close to the border, and he has a good Bible knowledge and has an opportunity to do a lot of teaching there. Next picture. And so this is the man in the gray shirts. They've built their church building. It needs a little more work if you look over the door there. And they have a latrine in the back. By local code, they have to build a legitimate latrine. but they're allowed to use this one until they get the money, the funds to make a concrete one. Next one. So how do you go into a Muslim area and feel safe? Well, you go with people that know the territory. They know the people, the characters. The chief of that village is actually Zubair's wife's uncle. So there's a family connection. He knows the village very well. If he says I'm safe and he's 6'6", and I go with him, I feel pretty safe. Meantime, while we were down in the terrorist area, there was an Islamic knife man or gunman that came out to the French embassy in Dar Salaam and killed 4 soldiers. So you never know where you're safe. You could be on the streets of Paris, Tennessee, or Flint, Michigan, and things happen. So we put our trust in God and allow that He'll take care of us. Let's go on to the last slide here, CJ. And just, if God wills, if we have future opportunities to go there, if we want to introduce faithful African brethren to this work, I think there's a lot to be said for the guys that preach in Zimbabwe that have been doing this now for 15 or 20 years, to go up to these guys and say, hey, we can do it ourselves. We don't have to have the American model. There's a lot of evangelism to do, deep Bible study, how to do a deep Bible study, what good is the Old Testament, training preachers, and encouraging church autonomy. That's really where I'm going to be doing my work, as if God allows me to go back over there. Just in closing, a couple things to keep in mind. COVID can open and shut doors pretty quickly. You never know who's going to require testing, who's going to require vaccinations, who's going to require vaccination passports. I went ahead and had the vaccine for COVID. I'd already had the disease, but to travel, I thought it would be better to go ahead and have the card that showed that I had a vaccine as well. And those things change from week to week and month to month. There's a preacher from Florida that'll be heading over to Dar Salaam next month, December. He's going over, and hopefully, if I can arrange things, I'll try to go over next summer again, or next spring. So that's where it's at now. And I know it's taken a lot of time here, but I appreciate you guys listening to all that.
No, this was fantastic.
Well, it shows me that we need to do more evangelizing here, because a lot of people have the same concept, and we're a denomination, we're not.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. I think also, Randy, we need to remember that there are a lot of places where people do want the gospel, because those attitudes in our country might change. And we need to be ready when they do change, and not think, oh, nobody wants to hear it anymore, so we stop saying it. We got to be ready to go ahead and preach the gospel in season and out of season.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think America needs it, and the rest of the world needs it. It's You're doing a good work, and I appreciate that. Yeah. And we need to. We have a responsibility. Each one of us has a responsibility to do what we can.
You do.
And I think you're doing a fantastic job over there. And the men, what impressed me is that you, and I think the men that you trained or are working with, understand they need to follow the doctrine of Christ and not Americanize. They need to understand what it is to be a true Christian and how it is to be organized. And it's not with our culture, but in their culture.
Yeah. And again, the temptation is they want to be like all the denominations. They want to be like the nations around them. They want to do things the way other people do them, and that's not New Testament Christianity. So there's a lot of unteaching that has to be done, and just getting them to look at the Bible. What does the Bible say to do, rather than what do we want to do, and let's see if we can justify it.
So you must have Bibles printed in their language that they can read.
Yeah, and usually I'll go ahead and send money over before I get there, and then we'll take them with us and deliver them if we can. I know in the past some preachers make a big deal about being in the pictures and showing everybody, hey, we gave 30 Bibles to this place, and we gave 20 songbooks to this place. And I tell Zubair, I don't care if I'm in any pictures or not. They need this stuff. I can, come up with the money for it. Get it to them. Don't wait for me. Just do the work, and we'll support you.
That's great.
Now, are the Bibles printed over there, or are they printed here in the United States?
They're printed over there. Most African countries have a Bible society. And in this case, the dominant language is Swahili, which is the slave trader language, but that is the common language before English that connects places. So you can get a Swahili Bible that's printed in Kenya, but they market it to Tanzania or vice versa. So that whole region, Swahili is very common. So we
What's the
get
price to have it up?
if you buy Bibles in quantity, they're about $9 or $10 each.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy just a single Bible off the rack, it might cost you $12. And that's the cheap, what we would call a pew Bible, just basic hardback. You can spend more money for a nicer Bible, but only the preachers go that route. I have a bilingual Bible that I take with me so that I can read the English and see the words on the Swahili column and know if they've got the right passage.
Okay. Well, if you need help with some money for printing up Bibles, let us know.
Okay. There's always a need for Bibles over there, and a lot of other countries as well. Last year, as COVID was breaking out, Steve Rudd and I went to Zimbabwe and realized that they didn't have Bibles. So Steve came back and he put together a big campaign with a lady down in Alabama, and they raised, I think, close to $30,000. And I mean, with that kind of leverage, they got a lot of Bibles. They worked with the printer and the publisher and said, this is what we want. And now there are lots of ladies in Zimbabwe that are having Bible studies in their own language.
Wow. Gotta love it.
Those things happen.
I hate to cut you off, but we are way over time tonight, so let me shut down the stream. First of all, I want to thank Ed for coming. Thank you for doing this presentation. Yeah. It was helpful, and hopefully we'll have you again real soon. Thank you.
Yeah, we would like to hear. I'm sure there's more you could tell us than you did tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. And again, any questions, CJ? I appreciate what you're doing with this. Let's give people God's answers. He's got the answers. He's got the wisdom.
Amen.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you want to contact us during the week, you can reach us at godsanswersyourquestions.com. You can check out our Facebook page, God's Answers Your Questions, and check out our YouTube channel under my name, CJ Marshall. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Ed. And Lord willing, we'll see you all next week. God bless.
God bless.